I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. On the phone with me, Ian Burns, our managing editor, all the way out there in Ottawa. Good morning, Ian.
Howdy ho.
How are we doing this morning?
Very, very snowy, but
Very
other than
snowy.
that, all's well.
There you go. We like feedback. We've got TikTok Live, we've got YouTube Live, and we've had some good comments. Somebody said they like listening to us, so that's good news. And then there's also some people that say, like say nasty things, and for some reason they don't like my glasses. They say they're grandma's glasses. Actually, they're grandpa's glasses because I'm a grandpa. Just a correction there. They are grandpa's glasses. Let's kick it off with the Bank of Canada. As expected, they lowered the interest rate. We're now at 3%. And that's, again, we're taking that the staircase down after we took the elevator up. We're now at 3%. That's a full 2 points that the interest rate has dropped since they started their cutting phase. And our economy is the reason they continue to cut. You did this story this morning, Ian. Our Bank of Canada GDP growth rate of 1.8 in 2025, and inflation's around our target of 2% right now.
Yeah, but it doesn't. The thing with this report is that, or forecast they call it, it doesn't really take into account the big, gigantic elephant in the room,
Yeah.
which is the US tariff, which is, it looks like is going to be put into effect on Saturday. So, I mean, inflation, obviously, you can go and ask a dog down the street or a chipmunk, and they would tell you that inflation is not going to stay at 2%. If this happens and we're in a trade war, it's going to go absolutely through the roof. And also, another thing that they don't really mention here, although there is a acknowledgement that economies, they say it so vaguely, but they say economies around the world appear to have diverged in recent years. So, in other words, the Americans are getting really rich and powerful while we are looking a
Yeah,
little bit
I mean,
poor and
we have a chart
feeble.
to show in a bit here too, and that really shows that contrast. And our Canadian dollar has depreciated material. I mean, throughout history, we've kind of like artificially depressed our dollar as well because it's good for the exporters, right? And not great for the consumers, but good for the exporters in our nation, right? And so some could argue that we've artificially depressed our dollar for the benefit of the corporations in Canada.
Definitely, and that's a classic tactic of a petrostate. But it's funny
Yeah.
that that's the case when the entire Canadian elite has been in denial about that for the last 20 or more years. But I mean, another thing I was going to say was the Americans are still on 4.5%
No,
for their interest rate. They're due to
well,
announce a decision soon. But I mean, we're really exposing the loonie to
uh,
like merciless attacks when we do things like that because you get such a better return if you go and buy US bonds and you put your money in dollars.
well, the Canadian government is even selling our bonds in U.S. funds. So there you go.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. Um, this is a big story. Our friend Holly Dones out of Blacklock said this story. No evidence backs the Prime Minister's claim. Remember when he did that? He said that it was explosive. If they found it, like if Pierre Poilievre exposed it. So his claim of explosive top secret evidence linking the Conservative Party to foreign agents was dismissed yesterday as the Commission on Foreign Interference. According to, he told the National Security Advisor, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service says it needed a response plan, and it turned out to be a nothing burger.
Yeah, well, I mean, he would hate to hear this, but Trudeau is fairly similar to Trump in the way that he seems to make so many mistakes that his opponents almost like they don't know where to aim. They don't know what to concentrate on because he just it's like one thing after another. And it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like how do you I mean it's a really important question in terms of like strategies that people adopt, particularly in politics. How do you deal with somebody like that who
Yeah,
makes so many mistakes and is in trouble so often?
yeah,
How do you actually pin them down on anything? It
yeah.
is it's very difficult.
One of the comments from one of the lawyers there. We saw the Prime Minister use his access to classified information to launch a partisan attack in his testimony before this commission, said Counsel Harlan, making the evidence on the last day of the hearings and therefore preventing participants asking other witnesses' questions around, it looks more like political grandstanding than taking the work of this commission seriously.
And doesn't that just summarize the Canadian political class grandstanding? That's all they seem to do.
Hmm.
And that includes Pierre Poilievre and that includes Jagmeet Singh, who we're about to talk about soon. Where are the serious people? Where have they gone? And how do we entice them back into politics?
Yeah.
Because it's getting to
It, it,
be desperate now.
it is too much in Canada, and that's, you're right, on all of them. They seem to say things, and it's just, and where's the to-do list? Like, like as much as people dislike Donald Trump, look at the stuff that's getting done there. Like, the promises deliver, promise deliver, promise deliver. And then this is the mandate of the American people. They voted for change. They're getting the change, and they're getting it in a rapid pace. Where is that in Canada?
And it's very important the word that you used there, promise, because this hasn't come out of nowhere. Trump, like as is the way in America's bizarre democracy, like he's been campaigning for years for this job now, and he made all these promises. He said that he was going to do all of this stuff, pretty specific actually about his plans, and
Detailed
sure enough,
to-do
he's done
lists.
it. And
Yep.
but the thing is, so he was the leader of the opposition, so to speak. I mean, that's a way of phrasing it. Donald Trump was during that period when he made all those promises, which he is now putting into effect. Our leader of the opposition is Pierre Poilievre. What are his promises? They're pretty meager. He doesn't
Right.
really say a lot. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like he hasn't even made promises to keep yet.
Well,
This is again about this shows the difference between the opposition in Canada and the opposition in the US, which is now the government in the US.
if I had the seat right now, whether that's provincial or federal, I would be saying, like, we need to get people to Europe. We need to get people to Japan. We need to get people to a bunch of nations and start inking deals. We need to make a deal for energy with all these people. They all want our energy. We have lots of minerals. Start making deals. Get envoys over there and start inking deals. That will change the Americans' minds on what's happening. Because if all of a sudden we're selling our resources, which is our greatest asset, but what's in the way here, especially with the Liberals and the NDP, is ourselves, because of the climate change agenda, which has suppressed our natural resources. Our natural wealth is being artificially suppressed by these people that have a globalist agenda.
Well, didn't you see our dear Prime Minister earlier this week was in Poland to discuss providing assistance to the Poles so that they can build nuclear power plants rather than waste our time giving them gas to help them
Right.
get there, because
But
obviously
there's
it takes a very long time to build nuclear
10
power
year
plants.
a
But
10-year
we're not gonna do
horizon.
that.
Yeah, it's
We're
no
not
different.
going to give them gas. They're just going to keep burning coal, which they have in Poland. They have reserves of coal in that country, so that's what they're going to burn.
No different than our plan to refuse to sell LNG, but we'll sell them hydrogen when we finally figure out how to make it efficiently.
Indeed.
Interesting. And then Melanie Jolie in the news a lot. She's going to meet with Marco Rubio today to discuss the tariffs. I'm not sure if Melanie Jolie is the right person to be saying that. That's why we need an election. We need strength in voice, right? Because the Americans aren't going to take the Liberals seriously right now.
Yeah, well, Rubio's just been confirmed. He's at the absolute peak of his powers. He's like, it doesn't get any better than this really for Rubio in terms of his like strength and his prestige, let's say, his like the strength of his position. And then Melanie Jolie might not even be an MP in a couple of months, never mind the foreign minister. So it is a bit like it's a mismatch, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's very hard to take them seriously if that's the case. Like, we're better off to send Mark Carney there and Pierre Poilievre and say, like, between the two of them, here, one of them is going to have a plan. Do you know what I mean? But sending Melanie Jolie there doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Oh, but then again, you can make the same argument for sending Trudeau because we know for certain that he's not going to have his job.
No, I didn't say Trudeau. I said
very soon.
Carney. I said Carney and Poilievre, not Trudeau.
Right. Yeah. Well, fair enough. Yeah. In which case, but then that's also hypothetical, isn't it? Whereas Rubio sits there with his, it's a fact that he is in power and that he represents power. Whereas it's hypothetical with those other chaps. I mean, The thing is, if Canada had a head of state, like a real head of state, that was always there, kind of thing, we could send that person. But, our sort of de jure head of state is the king, who obviously I wonder if he even knows that he's the king of Canada, to be honest. And then the sort of de facto head of state is the governor general, who says and does essentially nothing. It's almost like she's almost like a ceremonial ambassador who works for a charity or something like that. She just does nothing ever, really. So we're in this bizarre situation where we don't actually really have a head of state that could do a job like this.
Yeah, it puts us in a really tough spot for sure. Uh, Danielle Smith, though, still working it. It says, and Danielle Smith may have a deal to get no tariffs on the oil and gas.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that could happen because it seems to me that, as time has gone by, Trump, the thing that annoys Trump most and that has motivated him to do this, I think, is the deficit, the trade deficit that
Yeah.
exists between Canada and the US. That exists only for one reason, and that's Alberta's oil and to a lesser extent gas. So I'm not quite sure why he would exempt the source of his misery, of what's upset him in the first place. And it's also, he spends a lot of time insulting Alberta's oil, which he calls like low grade and cheap
Mm,
and awful oil because it's like a thicker version of oil, isn't it? It's like
yeah.
sour, I think they call it in the oil world. So and he obviously wants that oil to come from Texas and North Dakota and Alaska and places like that because the Americans have the reserves theoretically to meet the demand. So I don't really understand why he would exempt the source of the problem in his eyes.
Yeah, so I guess again we're just going to see. But one of the things that the politicians, the EB came out yesterday, and threw a bunch of stuff around there talking about more pandemic relief type funding for Canadians and businesses, is we should be addressing the real reason that I mean initially for sure what the Trump was looking for was strengthening our borders. Because I mean we just said the other day that we're going to close that Pacific trail that they knew people were crossing over. Like why was it open in the first place?
Oh, the PCT, Pacific Crest
Yeah.
Trail, yeah. Well, I mean, that's only ever really used by hikers. I think it's not really I don't think that's like a crossing for illegals. I don't
Well,
really know why that
there's
was
a
done
bunch of
either.
yeah, there's a bunch of gaps. Like when then we heard the other day that the RCMP only flew their helicopters up till 4 p.m. and not on weekends at all, and just like so. I mean, I'm sure people trying to cross illegally figured that out in a hurry.
Yeah, I do think that that's a red herring, though,
Mm.
from Trump and his people. They can talk about that border all they want, but they can't they can't make statistics exist that don't exist. They can't make the data show something that isn't true, namely that that border is a problem. It isn't really a problem. America has much graver problems with China, even, which it obviously doesn't even have a border with. But in terms of things coming into the country, and then Mexico, that is the problem. Mexico is the problem. It almost seems absurd to waste any energy whatsoever on Canada because it's just not a problem. The
Maybe we should.
problem, if there is a problem at all, it's the other direction. It's the Americans sending dangerous garbage into Canada. That's the real problem, which makes me think that it's not about that. I don't think it's even slightly about that. It's about something else.
Maybe you should accompany Melanie Jolie to visit with Marco Rubio, because maybe
Maybe I
they're not
should
getting the point
actually.
across.
Tiny, tiny hands Marco. Maybe I would resurrect that Trump insult and see if it got me anywhere.
Kevin O'Leary says the U.S. is in economic war with China, and I believe that is the real threat. It's the to both Canada and the United States is the Chinese are taking technology, and we're going to talk about it later. Like this recent thing with DeepSeek, OpenAI has come out and said that they stole that from them a lot. That's how they got this head start. And China has a pattern. TikTok, according to O'Leary, Lemon 8, Mao's Little Red Book, all Trojan horses for data. And I can tell you right now, DeepSeek, if they're worried about TikTok, what would DeepSeek be in there on the list of a Trojan horse?
Definitely, indeed. And it sort of surprises me that it's been allowed stay on the App Store. But I
Yeah.
don't know what
Th-
procedures Apple has in place to, defend against
I think
dodginess.
people have to realize this is a Sputnik moment, right? This is an AI race. No different than we had the race to the moon at that time when the Sputnik looked like it was ahead. I think we talked about that earlier. But
Yeah.
AI is likely to be more transformational than anything we've seen in our history. And I would have to say America cannot fail at it. I mean, Canada is not playing much of a role at it right now, other than they want to regulate it. But like regulation, great, but you can't slow down progress either because like there is other people doing it without likely the regulation that the Europeans or the Canadians want to see on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting to be it's kind of going to define the century, or at least that's what it seems like from this perspective. It seems like it's going to be the defining technology because China, you know, as anybody that follows uh, even sort of vaguely follows Chinese news, they'll know that their demographics are absolutely dreadful. They're so bad, in part because of the one child policy that they implemented, but their demographics are like they're very scared about that,
I
as
think
they should be. And AI promises potentially to fill that gap because if you don't have workers, which is the future that China faces, not having enough workers, they could automate things instead and maintain their dominance. So it's huge. And that's true of America too. Like because America obviously has only a fraction of the population of China. So how do you even those odds? It could be through AI, where you have a huge automated workforce, and then all of a sudden it doesn't really matter that China has like 1 billion more people than the US. So that it seems to me that that's going to determine which country dominates this century.
I'd like to remind people that the automotive industry was one of the largest industries in the industrialized world. General Motors used to be the largest large cap company in the world. There was a book I read way back in the 80s called On a Clear Day You Can See GM, because GM was the number one company in the Western world, And in the automotive industry, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, they were the big automakers. And then the Germans obviously built their kind of manufacturing around BMW, Mercedes, and tons of these other brands. China, out of nowhere, they were making Chinese cars like, say, 25 years ago that people were laughing at. China is now dominating the automotive industry. 50% of the world's vehicles are being made in China. And they're some of the best and most technologically advanced vehicles in the world. And they have over 50% of those vehicles right now are selling as EVs. And they're accessing markets all over the world, including Australia and, like many, many countries. Right now, they're being locked out of, Canada and the US, and, they're into Europe and that stuff. But like, if you look at how they dominated an industry that they weren't even in 30 years ago, and they're now the dominant player in that industry, and it is one of the industries that birthed our industrialized world.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of why Trump's the president right now, because Detroit and a lot of those sort of towns around the Great Lakes, where the cars were made and lots of other industrial products, they were the richest places in America. I mean, you can literally go back and look at the average salaries and stuff like that, GDP per capita. They used to be the richest places in the whole of the United States, which is kind of funny to say that now. Detroit's like a hollowed out, pretty sort of defeated place to go. But that used to be the case. And then what happened? Well, primarily the Japanese made cars more cheaply, and they were more efficient, and also to a lesser extent, I guess, the Europeans. But it was really the Japanese and then the Koreans. And now, interestingly, they are being pushed aside as well, aren't they? It's like
Yeah.
the Chinese are
Nissan
even pushing those out.
Nissan is on its knees and like basically looking for help from Honda, which is not doing as well. These used to be the giants: Honda's, Nissan, Toyota, and Chinese is basically like locking them out of the Chinese market as well.
Yeah, but the only difference, I suppose, is back then the Americans they really believed in globalization and international trade, in part probably because they were trying to win the Cold War, and they kind of thought that that was the way to do it. That was a secret ingredient. So they allowed all these cars to come and sell, like Honda and so on, and Kia, and all the cars that ended up taken over a lot of the market in the US. But with the Chinese ones, they're not letting that happen. And there is no Cold War, or not the same anyway. They're not choosing to fight this Cold War the same way. So they're just, they're slapping Canada and their friends and saying, don't buy Chinese EVs, and they're not letting them come into their own market. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, because obviously the US market is the biggest consumer market in the world by quite a long way. And if you can't sell your product there, I don't know, can you really be like top of the world kind of thing? I don't know. That's
Well,
gonna be very interesting.
the largest automobile market right now is China. Um,
But it's not the same when you sell cars for like 3,000 US dollars or something versus
yeah,
60 and $70,000.
on a revenue basis, you're correct. But on vehicles sold, uh, this one is causing quite the stir in social media, and a lot of people expected it. Jagmeet Singh sounding like he's willing to lengthen the stay. Like there's been rumors of that Mark Carney was on the phone trying to get Jagmeet to give him until October to kind of find a better standing for his Liberal Party.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense that he would do that. But it once again just highlights how crucial it is to have a government, and a minority government like of the sort that the Liberals have overseen the last, whatever it's been now, nearly 6 years, hasn't it? That's that's not a real government, is it? It's not a strong government anywhere, where you constantly have to barter with
Yeah,
fringe parties that have their own like myopic obsessions that they want to push on the rest of the
yeah.
country, that the rest of the country does not want. That's not a proper government, is it? So it just sort of highlights how rancid this arrangement is and how crucial it is that a proper government is formed so that this kind of thing can't happen anymore.
Well, to the point you made earlier, Justin Trudeau was bragging about how he's kept a minority government in power this long, longest ever. And it's due to what you just said. It's due to making these deals that most, the majority of the population don't want. But it's they hang on to power and he makes deals that, like Canada wouldn't typically make otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that strictly speaking, it is still it's still constitutional and it's still democratic and all the rest of it. It's still legit to do that. But I think it does really harm um it harms the reputation of Canadian democracy when you see all these deals being done behind closed doors, and you see lots of policies, really obscure fringe policies, just being like thrust down the throat of the Canadian people when they didn't ask for them, or like only a very small minority of people ask for them. That does damage to the perception that we have a representative democracy, doesn't it? It makes people wonder, like, what's the point? What's the point of even like voting if this kind of thing's going to happen?
Dr. Brian Day's clinic ordered to pay BC costs after failure of Marathon private health lawsuit.
Yeah, that was filed in 2009, I believe.
Wow.
Crazy. That really is a marathon, that, isn't it? But his argument was that the public healthcare system wasn't able to provide certain you know, treatments or whatever. It didn't fulfill its obligations, and therefore its monopoly was moot, and it shouldn't have its monopoly, and private care should step in instead and provide services to people in exchange for money. But I mean, that's an argument that goes back very long way in Canada, doesn't it? So
Well,
in a sense, I guess I'm not surprised it took so long.
that is a while, 2009. And then Ottawa's meh budget drew skepticism from public finance department was told. But again, we're coming back to our meta thing. Young people barely notice because, we're not, there is no meta, which means no Facebook and Instagram, like where news was
Yeah, it's a
typically on
classic
there.
case of unintended consequences there, isn't it? That, like, the Liberals have, they've released this law, the Online News Act, and it's run around, caused chaos, and then bitten them on their rear end after all. So I do wonder when they've read this focus group study, I wonder if they've said, like, maybe we shouldn't have done that then. Overall, perhaps that was a bad idea to
It's-
demand that Facebook pay money to have news articles on their website.
you spoke of Pierre Poilievre. Look, we need more concrete plans from him, but I haven't heard anything out of Mark Carney or Chrystia Freeland other than stuff they won't continue to do that is under Trudeau. But where's their plan to, it's just a lot of, like platitudes and talking, like we need to make a strongest economy in the G7, which is like, that seems like just like a talking point.
Totally, and I think in a weird way I kind of benefit, if you want to call it benefit, by still having my toes in the British political scene. I still read a lot of news from the UK, and that those words, almost word for word, you hear them coming out of the mouths of the British government. It's like we're going to be the fastest growing economy in the G7. It's like sometimes when you see it, it's so banal, it's so trite. I have to wonder if they like have a big Zoom meeting where they decide what nonsense they're gonna roll out to try and fool people into supporting them.
Well, we've seen those videos many times where news networks, especially in the United States, have a message and then it's just like they say the same message over and over. Like you said, they have a meeting and here's the point that we're getting across. You know,
At
like a
least
lot of
those
people.
at least those montages are about the same country. I just find it particularly weird that it's across all the borders, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
like, and it isn't just Britain and Canada. It's like Ireland and
it's
European countries. They're all saying
it,
the same thing. I mean, they can't all be the fastest growing economy in the
no.
G7.
And then like we see all the backlash for Elon Musk and like we're seeing it in Europe and that's saying he needs to get out of Canadian politics and German, like European politics and all that. But nobody complained about George Soros, who bought, like hundreds of radio stations and has been, like meddling in politics for how long?
Yeah, and also because Elon Musk has been accused of meddling in British politics as well. Quite a hilariously timed photo opportunity that they arranged around about the time that they were doing that was with Bill Gates, who'd come to Downing Street in London to speak to the Prime Minister, the most powerful people in Britain. Bill Gates being a massive influential sort of, well, he calls himself a philanthropist, but I'm not sure that we should use that term. But he's like a huge influence in the world and throws his money around to try and get policy changed. And he was doing that in the UK, just like one may argue Elon Musk was trying to do. But obviously, Bill Gates is seen to be all right. He's a good lad, whereas Elon Musk is, the devil incarnate, isn't he?
Well, here you go. Parents really do have a favorite child, according to this new study. And I don't know if that's, I think most people would agree with that. Like, I'm not sure why it's a big deal, but, you know, do you
Well,
have, you have, do
because
you have
I
two
guess it's one of
children?
those things. Sorry?
Do you have two children? You want to go on the record right now and say which one's your favorite so that your child can play that back later and say, I see, I told you.
What's very interesting about this, it is one of those things where you know, it's like sky is indeed blue, scientists prove, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, okay, obviously. But it's good to have the data nonetheless.
Mm.
But what was interesting about this is that they say girls, like daughters, tend to be favored over boys, like a little bit anyway, and that the elder child or eldest is also you know, attract favoritism. But then the most interesting one, and the one that I can kind of relate to a little bit, though I'm not going to say I have a favorite child, but I mean the one that I can understand is it says the child that is the most like easygoing, basically, like the most conscientious and the most sort of like friendly and obedient. That child is, surprise, surprise, preferred by parents. And I can say
Wonder
that like,
why. Wonder why.
yeah, and my girl is, well, though she's gone through a bit of a phase now, a rebellious phase, but she's a lot more kind of obedient than my boy, and it's like I could totally see why parents would favor that child, the obedient one.
So are you going on the record as saying your daughter is your favorite child?
Definitely not. No, I love them equally for all time. How about you? Do you have a favorite one?
I'm not going to say that's nonsense, right?
It's a shame that Nick's not within hearing. Then you could have had one of your kids around.
I think they're all favorites in certain ways, right? You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
just like when people ask me what's a favorite day of the week, and I would say I like every day for different reasons. And I think that's the, like the way to do it, right? Because like there's a lot of people that say I hate Monday and I hate certain days and stuff like that. I actually love every day. I just find something to like in every day, and no different than your children, right? So you find what you like, and I don't think you need to have a favorite per se. But obviously, the person that you can talk to more easily is probably the one that you talk to more often.
Yeah. I mean, that's the truth, though. You've nailed it there. It's like children, just like all humans, are they're different people. They're individuals. They're unique, and that's something to be celebrated and loved about your kids. But it's all that also means inevitably that one of your kids is probably going to be like more like you, or like you're gonna have similar opinions with what to one of your kids, more similar than the other kids, and therefore it'll look like that's your favorite, but it's not necessarily the case.
And then there's some parents that actually pit their kids against each other. And I have a friend out in where I used to live in the city of Champions. He had three boys, and he had said that, and he'd done well for himself. And he said when he dies, the child that has done the best for themselves gets everything. The other two get nothing. I was just like, what? And he said, yeah, they've proven that they don't deserve anything, and the child that's worked the hardest gets the rest of my whatever I've worked for.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very nice, does it? Where it's almost like families as like corporations or something. I mean,
Yeah.
the Trump family seems to be a little bit like that, but I don't know. I mean, he certainly incorporates them into his business ventures, but I don't think I'm not entirely sure that he makes them fight each other to the death to like win his favor.
The other one I've heard quite common is that unless you have grandchildren, you don't need anything from me, or like from the people that have something to leave behind. That it's for the grandchildren, not necessarily for the people. They want their own children to struggle and emerge. Right? That's a good old Notre Dame saying: "Struggle and emerge." Luctor or Murgo. I don't know if I said that
Yeah,
right. My
well, you're
Latin
getting
may
your
not be
getting
up.
your Latin out there.
My Latin may not be up to par. Anybody can correct us on the Latin there. And then the big hearing is going on today in the United States for one of the more controversial, uh, uh, what you call appointments by Donald Trump, RFK of the famed Kennedy family, is trying to get confirmation for being the Health and Human Services Secretary.
Yeah, I think this is generally, I think, considered to be the hardest one for them to get through. But I thought the other fella as well, the Hegseth Defense Secretary, he was also that was really
Mm-hmm.
fine margins, wasn't it? I think JD Vance, the Vice President, had to
Yeah,
actually come and
yeah. He
do
did
something quite unusual and cast his vote. Yeah.
the tiebreaker. What's unusual about this one though is, I mean, there was protesters. I watched a few minutes of it. The protesters were starting to scream like like 3 minutes into RFK's speech. I think what like his main function here, and don't forget he's a Democrat and comes from a long line of Democrats, one of the most famous Democratic families, the Kennedys.
Yeah,
Um,
the most famous probably, I would say.
and then his father was assassinated, as is his uncle. Like that's like, and they're going to release those details right away here. Um, but what he wants to do, I'm not sure why people are fighting him. He wants to make America healthy again. Like God only knows, like the amount of sugar that they push onto people here in Canada and the U.S. is I've changed myself, and I can testify to this. Like I've lost 60 pounds over the past like 5-6 years ago, and it really had to do with what I was eating. Like I just changed my diet. I didn't diet. I just changed my lifestyle. I work out every day. And at 62, I'm adding muscle, and that's not usual, and it all has to do with their diet. Like the stuff that they're convincing us to eat, and like don't shop in the middle aisles. Like just forget about going down those middle aisles. This is what he's saying, the same things, but they're linking it all to obviously the vaccines and stuff like that. But his first opening thing is that he's in favor of vaccines. But like the food lobby and the drug lobby in the United States is all powerful, and a lot of the stuff in those middle aisles is produced by cereal giants, is like you want to say, like, and a lot of the cigarette giants bought a lot of the food products. So Figure that out.
Yeah. And he's particularly he focuses quite a lot on sugar, doesn't he? But he also focuses on all these, like, when you just pick something up, like pick up something in your house and then like a food product and just read all the like random ingredients. Like I'm looking at one now. It's like FD&C blue number two. It's like all these dyes and things like that, which we've just kind of allowed, and unpronounceable chemicals and things that we've just allowed to sort of like slip into our food. He focuses on that, doesn't he? And he kind of
Yeah. So
he
I
it's
have,
his position that that's all pretty dangerous, and he wants to get rid of that sort of stuff. And I think that that explains his popularity. I would say a lot of people agree with that.
yeah.
And certainly when you look at the state of the sort of public health in the US, you look at obesity, you look at like really dramatically increasing sort of stomach cancers, like colonic cancers among young people that are starting to develop in the US and Canada, actually. Like to an extent, I feel like business as usual has disgusted Americans. They're absolutely disgusted with the status quo. And
Well,
that's why so many people were willing to give Kennedy a shot, because he's so like
I,
he's so
I
different, and he's offering a completely different vision.
I'd advise people to go listen to his opening statement. The amount of obesity in the United States and in Canada and young children, and it's like like we're just basically on sugar diets, right? Like, and our household right now is we really try to do whole ingredients. And one of the rules I try to say, if I can't pronounce it, I'm not eating it. And if I look at, like you just said, I don't know what you picked up there, your bag of Doritos, or like because you got the GST off of them.
It's actually because I've been ill for weeks. It's actually like strepsil type things. It's
Mm,
from Halls. It's like menthol. So
yeah,
really, that should just be menthol, shouldn't it? That's
yeah,
all it really is. But
yeah.
it's got all this random stuff in, like flavors and colors, and then
Well, I
soy
mean
for some reason.
that's all that red color, which my shirt should be red, but it's kind of like a peachy color. The red coloring is a lot of the times it's ground up beetle that's put in there, and it's called, I can't remember what it's called, but it's not, it doesn't say beetle on the packages. I think it says cochina or something like that, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I think one of
Yeah,
the
but I used to do that though as well. What's funny about that is that goes back thousands of years, using those bugs to like
yeah,
as a dyeing agent.
yeah. One of the tools that you have in your pocket right now, if you load the ChatGPT app, um, and you just take a picture of the label and ask it, should I eat this? And it'll tell you. Probably not, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, look, it's funny that this is like it's sort of nowadays people hear a conversation like what we're having, or they hear Kennedy say what he says, and it's like they immediately categorize it as right wing. It's like, oh,
yeah,
that's a right wing idea. But I'm not so sure. I mean, Kennedy obviously he's left wing. I mean, for real, he's very left wing,
yeah,
and he's like a liberal, and he's like a left wing activist.
yeah. And then,
Ultimately, if you're going to describe him, and it used to be the left. Like when I was a young gun, this is what the left was all about. They were all about like simpler food, simpler living, down with the corporations, that kind of thing. It's like Kennedy just hasn't changed. He's still
yeah,
that kind of a lefty, but
yeah.
for some bizarre reason, that's now a right wing thing in the sort of common perspective.
And this may surprise some people, but I identified as being left because I believed in all that stuff too, and I still believe in all that stuff. But the left has moved so far around a circle. I think they're like they're at the extreme end, and now some of these people that are identified as left are saying that they're that I'm an extreme right, and I'm just like, okay. I don't think I've moved. No different than like a lot of these people that did identify as left. Joe Rogan, Elon Musk. Now people are painting them as extreme right. The same as RFK, they're painting him as extreme right. Eating healthy just makes common sense for your family, and it takes the burden off the healthcare system. One of the other things that we don't have it in our story load this morning is the new press secretary, and I can't remember her name right off the top of my head here, but she came out yesterday and said there was 440 odd media outlets that were banned from the White House briefing room. They're all welcome back. Plus, they're welcoming in all new media that is, like large podcasts and stuff like that. Creators, anybody with a large audience that's creating real news is welcome in, and it's amazing to watch how the people on the far left now are screaming that this is just letting in a bunch of right wing extremists. Wouldn't people want freedom of the press? I just don't understand how they try to paint that as allowing different independent media outlets to have a voice instead of just like it's a concentrated voice they're trying to defend, which has clearly been shown to be biased.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's one of the sort of like one of the advantages of being like a little bit older than, a little bit older than sort of 17 or whatever, is that you get to see things change. Like we just talked about that, how those ideas went from being left wing to right wing, and it's just like all of a sudden it's just like what the hell? But another thing is that about the media. It was all about free speech from the left. It was all about like alternative media, especially during the Bush years. I'm sure you can remember people like Michael Moore and what was that, Democracy Now or something? One of those other channels that were like very hostile to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the war on terror and all that. They were looked upon with derision, and they were seen as like fringe freaks by the establishment. Nobody gave them the time of day. And it's kind of like that used to be a left wing thing, where it's like we've got all these fringe people and fringe outlets, like people like Noam Chomsky, where it's like nobody wants to give Chomsky a hearing and all the rest of it. But now he's gone through the other side, and he's almost like an establishment guru in some ways. And it will never stop being baffling. But I suppose when you've been around for a while, you just get to see it. Like you can actually remember it in your own head, can't you? And it makes it all the more absurd and inexplicable.
Yeah, interesting. I did post that on my LinkedIn. It got a ton of comments and a ton of reposts and stuff like that. I think people should go look at it. You can find me on LinkedIn and you can read that post. I just find it interesting that people would have a negative reaction to freedom of the press.
Indeed. Well, we know all about that in Canada, don't we? Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we saw that with Mark Carney in his first when he did his launch. He locked out three journalists that were from accredited organizations, and the police didn't let them in, which is odd. No.
Yeah, well, it is odd, and the Liberals certainly seem to adopt that approach. Trudeau's done that a number of times. And when I interviewed the Heritage Minister, Pascal Santon, she said something along the lines of the more journalists, the better. It's like the more the merrier. She wants as many journalists as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very hard to make
Believe.
that concord with the position of the Liberal government,
Yeah.
because the position of the Liberal government is if we don't like you and you say nasty things about us, we're just going to say that you're not a journalist and you can't even come to the press conference. So
Yeah.
bye bye. We're not even going to respond to your emails.
Yeah.
Like our overpaid media bureaucrats aren't even going to pick up your phone calls. Not that they have phone numbers, but they're not going to pick up. They're not going to respond to your emails. And
The
that's
ones.
like you need to invite the people that hate you. That's kind of the whole point. That's the only time at which
Mhm.
you can truly call yourself a liberal that believes in free inquiry and free expression, is if you allow the people that don't like you, that say things that you don't want to be heard, if you allow them into the room and allow them to speak and allow them to inquire. That's the only time that it's actually worth
Well,
anything, you know?
if nothing else, if you've been watching the past, I think it's 8 days now of the 9 days of the Trump administration, access by the press has been unprecedented. If you compare that to the past 4 years, I mean, everybody's on media outlets, and they're on every one of them. They're on CNN. They're on the different networks. They're not picking anybody. They're doing interviews all over the place, and they're
Yeah.
stepping up to the microphone, and we don't see that here.
Well, it's not the job of the government or any government body anywhere in a democracy to decide which journalists get access. It's not up to them to do that. For like one reason being, a pretty important reason, not the only reason, is that they're not qualified to do that. They're not competent enough to do that. And that's the point that Holly Dawn made when you interviewed her. I thought it was like the best point that she made, where she said, like, I've been a journalist for like 40 years, I've done X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. Like, you can't get some kid to write a policy paper that determines that I'm not a journalist, that I'm not legit, because
Yeah.
that kid isn't even, that kid doesn't know anything. And nor, for that matter, does Justin Trudeau know anything really about journalism. They're not qualified to do that. And it's also a violation of the basic principles of democracy. So it's a virtuous thing to do. to allow the press from everywhere, anybody that comes and knocks on the door of the White House and says, "I'm a journalist," that they should be allowed entry. I mean, it's as basic as that. It's not for the U.S. government to decide who's
Maybe
legit and who isn't.
maybe we should apply for the White House briefing room and show that, because like we're not recognized by our liberal government as journalists, and maybe we can show that we can be recognized by the United States of America.
We can go there and ask them to ask the Liberal government questions.
We've just sent off a package to Pascal Saint-Onge and Justin Trudeau and even the leadership candidates, including with letters from our provincial government MLAs and from our city and everything, asking like why we're not considered that when we perform a service for our community. And also, we've done the best election coverage, I would say, better than anybody in our area. And at a minimum, give back our audience that you've taken away with Bill C-18. I've got to get that plug in, I guess, always.
Yeah, and it might even benefit you, Mr. Liberal Party, or soon to be Conservative Prime Minister, because people then might actually know something about your policies, because you'll actually have an audience again for government policies, not just for us, but for their actual pronouncements.
Well, let's move on to markets. Again, our friend Gold here, just kind of chopping around, still chop, right? Chopping. Again, waiting for some direction. Bitcoin. Trump media launched a fintech thing today too, which is interesting. But Bitcoin moving up higher. I mean, right now, that was earlier. I took that like probably 30 minutes ago. Well, we've been talking, it was 101. Right now, 106. If anything, Bitcoin is highly volatile. How's that? Bitcoin at 106,512 right now. The chart showing 101. But you can see that it's in that chopping range. And we talked yesterday about that being a head and shoulders formation, which means if you flip that, which is, I mean, if you're a technical person, you can kind of do that. And that would say that, the next move up is, into the 100 and, I don't know, like 120 some likely, right? So in its next move, if you're a technical analyst, if you like playing with the technicals. And then our Canadian dollar after that rate announcement, down a little bit today, but in that range, they're chopping in there because I think the dollar right now is artificially kind of like, because the markets are leading indicators. The markets are definitely leading indicators. And right now it's kind of priced in all this stuff that's happened, right? Any positive news, even if because most of half of our trade, I think, is in, energy to the United States. Even if we get an exemption on energy, it would be a bounce on that. I think we need some cooler heads to prevail. We need a leader. We need a leader that can lead this country out of the mess that we find ourselves in, and the mess that we've been put in because of no alternatives. Right? That's the bad part of this. Right? We have a partner right now that doesn't really acting like a good partner, and we just don't have any choices.
Yeah, it's going to take a very, very shrewd bit of governance, isn't it, to get out of this situation that we're in.
Like I said, like we should be like, instead of, I think, like what was the tours, like the Beatles never did a last tour. They just kind of broke up before their tour, like a farewell tour. I think the Mick Jagger and they did a Rolling Stones, they had a farewell tour, didn't they?
Yeah, I think so. It came to BC, didn't
And
they?
I
They
think
came to Vancouver.
Justin Trudeau may be on this farewell tour, racking up some more points and some more expenditures as he's touring the world as the resigned PM.
Yeah, Elton John just came to mind. He called it the farewell tour, didn't he, Elton John,
Yeah.
recently?
And I think that's
So
what Justin's on
maybe
right
that's
now,
more to more to Justin's tastes, probably, I'd say.
where he can, still be greeted. I think, a lot of that stuff he really liked, and it's, like it's going to be tough for him to not get free lunch everywhere he goes.
Well, he's gonna have to get a job where that happens still. I mean, I'm not sure what it'll be, but probably some
Lots
kind of NGO.
lots of restaurants provide you free meals, so there's that.
Maybe he could be a McDonald's ambassador or something. The new
Um,
Ronald McDonald?
the And we just take a look at what our Canadian companies are, our largest companies are, and then we're going to look at the United States companies. So in our list, Royal Bank of Canada, Shopify, TD Bank, so there's two banks already, Enbridge, which is an energy company, Brookfield Corporation, Thomson Reuters, CP, and Bank of Montreal. We have four banks though that are in our top, and a lot of the other banks are right in there too, like below that. So our banks I would say, is our biggest industry in Canada.
Yeah, well, in terms of stocks, they are the blue chip stocks, aren't they? If you just
They
want
are
steady away stocks in Canadian
they
dollars,
are
it's got to be the banks.
by the market cap, they are the largest companies in Canada by market cap.
And there's the one little tech gem that Canada possesses, number two,
Shopify.
Shopify. Yeah.
And if we keep it up with this capital gain stuff, guess where it's going to go?
Well, both of the senior figures in Shopify have complained about that, haven't they? Quite sort
Yeah.
of vocally.
Now let's turn our attention to the American top 10. And a lot of these are a little bit different. They make products and services. Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, which NVIDIA was at the top there until we got this DeepSeek thing. NVIDIA, one of the most desirable companies in the world right now. Amazon, Jeff Bezos' company. Alphabet, Meta, Tesla, Berkshire Hathaway. That's the first kind of like banking thing. That's an investment company. That's
Buffett.
yeah, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who's just passed. Broadcom and Walmart.
Broadcom are semiconductors, aren't they? They're like they're pretty good at making stuff.
But quite the difference in these large market cap compared to ours, right? Ours are services, financial services, and theirs are making products, right? So,
but also look at the market cap. Apple's market cap 5 trillion Canadian dollars. That's like five or more times the entire top nine there of what Canada has.
Look at you doing math, right?
Oh yeah, journalists can sometimes do numbers.
But it is a huge difference, right? And that's what people need to look at. This is where we ended up. This is how we're here, is because we haven't had a lot of investment into like getting people to invest in Canada and create companies. Shopify is our latest greatest thing, right? Like it's like resources used to be our number one thing too, but the resource sector has been so severely depressed, and some of them have been taken out by U.S. companies. Like if you think of like Barrick Gold and stuff like that, it used to be like a big deal, and I think it's American Barrick now, and it's a lot of our miners are actually mining on the other sides of the world, like B2 Gold, which was I interviewed him once, Clive. Most of their mines are not in Canada. They're in other parts of the world because they can't get it done here. We have some of the world's best mining technology. Some of the world's top professionals are Canadians, and they're running mines in different parts of the world.
Yep. And then there's no real significant mining in like way up north, is there? Which is like another giant question mark presents itself, like in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. Like, they don't even explore very much up there, do they? I mean,
well, we do have
that's a shame.
In Kelowna, we do have claim to fame of Chuck Fipke here, who started Diamet, one of the largest diamond mines, and that's in the territories.
But it's in general, it's an underexploited asset, isn't it, for various reasons, including political and cultural, but also, I guess, the weather.
Lately, a very suppressed asset in the last 10 years, very suppressed. And like our environmental minister was an activist prior to his appointment as environmental minister.
Indeed, and his counterpart in British Columbia is Adrian Dix, the esteemed Adrian Dix, who's doing climate change and environment for BC now.
And then the person that would not do interviews basically with anybody, Adrian Dix, the man of very few words for the media.
Yeah, very few words indeed. Strange, because he was a journalist, I think, in his younger days.
Maybe he hates journalism. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe he hates himself.
Apple has been secretly working with SpaceX and T-Mobile to add support for Starlink network. Yeah, it looks like there's a deal that's getting done with Starlink. I have Starlink. And Starlink is, I'm sure, on the list of many EMS people, especially what we've seen in the hurricanes and on the East Coast in the United States, and in the fires that ravaged Los Angeles, like SpaceX playing a big role in that, in putting communications back online for emergency workers and stuff like that. And we do have one here ready to go for us in Kelowna now. We have a dish just like the one pictured there, so that we can go anywhere now and live stream from from anywhere. Whether that's at the top of that mountain behind me, or wherever. Wherever we can see the sky, we can live stream from now, thanks to Starlink.
And SpaceX as well. I mean, it's not in this list of things to discuss, but they've just been commissioned by Trump to collect some astronauts, haven't they? And Elon Musk's very happy about that. They're just kind of like everywhere. They're everywhere at once, really. SpaceX.
Well, Starlink is a part of SpaceX. Starlink is just kind of like a sub. Starlink is their global satellite system that, like, I think there's 8,000 satellites, and you see them sometimes, like people see this string of lights going across the sky. That would be Starlink. And
sometimes they disintegrate in the atmosphere, and that looks pretty amazing, doesn't it? When that's because that happened last week, I think, or a couple of weeks ago. It looks really cool when it happens.
There you go. And I've been using Starlink at home for the past couple of years now, and it's been very reliable. And I would recommend people take a look at it, because no contracts. And T-Mobile is, I think, one of the first carriers in the US that's going to have it. So there'll be no dead spots for people on T-Mobile. And Rogers Communications here in Canada has a deal. So it'll be interesting to see when they can finally launch that, so that, when you're traveling to the Coquihalla or to Calgary or Vancouver, Calgary, that you can have connection on your mobile device all the time. You can actually do it right now if you have your own Starlink dish. You can position it either in a glass roof like of a Tesla, or I've seen some guy in a pickup truck actually bolted a Starlink dish to his roof, because they'll pick up connections up to 160 kilometers an hour. And a lot of airlines are putting on, so they're actually having better dishes. Most of the major airline carriers are now using Starlink to get internet for people while they're flying. And I used it when I just went to Vegas lately. I had connectivity the whole time while I was flying.
Very cool. I mean,
thanks to our friends at Starlink.
Yeah, I find like in BC, my service is always choppy. I mean, I know you mentioned the Coquihalla, but it's like all over. Like the Kootenays is another sort of bit of a dead spot when you're driving around there, which is like probably where you're going to need it the most as well, when you're kind of isolated. So I think it's a huge benefit to BC specifically.
You and I talk quite a bit, and we're on the 16th floor of Landmark here, and I have to, lots of times you say, you can't hear me, so I have to move around the room to have a connection. And we're in the center of Kelowna. We're literally in the center in a high-rise tower, and connectivity is horrible.
Yeah, so it could be transformative. Yet another way that technology is kind of like, it's chipping away in the background at a lot of our kind of inconveniences in life.
Yeah. And this is where OpenAI says Chinese rivals using its work for their AI apps. And this is the, like I said, this is an AI race, and I think it's going to heat up here, and I think there's going to be a lot of stuff going on here, because maybe the reason DeepSeek made those advances is because they jumped, they basically had a head start there. I mean, we've seen that with China, with all their technologies that developed. Like, if you take a look at China, if you look at 50 years of history, basically a nation in abject poverty, and like basically a farm nation, and to probably one of the most technologically advanced societies in the world.
And it happened in short order, really, didn't it? Probably.
That's what I mean. They built whole cities. Like, if you take a picture of like some Shezhou, I can't pronounce the names, but if you go take a look at some of the cities, there were nothing, right? But farm villages. And you can compare them to any Canadian city, and your mind would be blown on what they're doing.
Yeah, the coastal cities, particularly, are just phenomenal, aren't they? With the kind of high-speed rail and all kinds of things, and like beautiful lights that they have to illuminate their boulevards.
Like, like right now, there's going to be we have Gavin Dew in later today. There's going to be, probably talking about the second crossing. Like we're probably going to talk about this second crossing for the next, 10 years before we do anything. The Chinese would probably have it half built by now.
Well, yeah, I would say an even better example would be the Site C Dam, which is like first started to talk about that in the 1940s or something. It's
Yeah,
like God's sake.
yeah.
It's the Chinese. That's one area where they literally just humiliate the West, I think, in terms of their ability to devise and complete projects very quickly. They make a mockery of the Western system.
So the EV mandate in our EV section, the EV mandate, they pulled it in the U.S., but they still say EV market will grow bigger in 2025. 1 in 4 cars sold will be electric, and that's despite a wave of doubters. And this is from Cox Automotive that 2025 will be the strongest year for the auto industry since the pandemic. Again, look if take a look at it. I'm a proponent for EVs, but I'm also believe that we shouldn't mandate anything. That people, no different than when there was no iPhone, people will switch to the iPhone because it was better, cheaper, better, faster, safer.
But
But
important to recognize that the iPhone, even though it's ridiculously expensive, it's a lot cheaper than it would otherwise be because it's made in China. Whereas
yeah,
with these tariffs on Chinese EVs, I mean, I feel like if they were really serious about the EV mandates and EV adoption, they would lift those tariffs and the
yeah,
Chinese would be able to sell like 10,000, $15,000 would be able to sell Tesla rip-offs, wouldn't they? And people would
yeah,
probably just buy them.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, we have to get there at like really high prices. But
So
there are reasons for that. But I
we
mean, that's something to bear in mind.
there's a Tesla. You speak of Tesla. Tesla, one step closer to large scale unsupervised full self drive. I use full self drive supervised every day. And here's a little clip we're going to play of the Teslas coming out of the factory on their own, parking by themselves. And this is an army of Teslas all driving by themselves. And you can see they're going to come out of the tunnels here. And they go find their parking spot, get ready to be loaded on transport trucks or on rails. But so there you go. Where they used to have people drive them out of the factory floor, and they're coming out of a tunnel. And look at that, all by themselves. There's your army of robots already.
But don't you have to get into the car to like send it on its merry way? Who's been doing that? Who's been getting in there to make them all go like
Well, I don't
that?
know. Maybe
Like,
when they leave the factory floor, the guy just sets it and says, "Go park yourself." Well, there's actually Smart Summon, which you can use now in the cars, where you can actually say you're at the Costco parking lot and you're standing at the front door and say it's parked in the back corner. You can actually, in my car, you can actually summon the car and it'll come get you. This works in Canada right now, so you can summon your car. It's called, because of Elon's sense of humor, actually Smart Summon. You can do the acronym yourself, but there you go. So that's another step there, and I think that earnings is being. I think they have an earnings report, and Elon will be on the call with the earnings report and talking about Tesla and energy a lot. Tesla doing a lot of energy stuff in the UK right now as well. And we already talked about this, breaking a SpaceX and Apple to partner with Starlink. We already covered that one off. And all we have left is the meme of the day. And now this is your meme, so I'll let you go with it.
well, it's just people enjoy ripping on the European Union, don't they, lately? Because they seem to be allergic to innovation, but they love regulation. Like, for example, forcing people that sell bottles, like bottles of water or whatever, to make it so that the lid is attached to,
Yeah.
attached to the bottle, so you can't take it off. Somehow, I think they think that's going to help with recycling or something. Meanwhile, as the European Union does that in the background, the real battle takes place between US and Chinese, high technology companies who are sort of having a fight about the future of the species and the future of our planet, while the European Union makes sure that it's a little bit harder to get a drink.
One of the memories I have is when I used to coach. I coached kids. My daughters ring at hockey and fastball. Was that we used to do bottle drives, right, to fundraise so kids could go to tournaments and stuff like that. And one of the things, You had to, when you took the bottles to the bottle depot, you had to remove the cap so they wouldn't take the bottles with caps on them. So I don't know what you do in the European Union, right? If you have, if you have the kids, they're cutting the caps off or whatever it is, so you can't get the cap off, right? So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like it's overhyped, this particular thing, because it's symbolic. That's why it serves the purpose of being a symbol of what the European Union has prioritized in recent years. And it's not DeepSeek and OpenAI and things like that. I mean, it's not that at all, because their regulations are their regulations are a few steps ahead of their actual
innovation,
production of
innovation.
what they actually have in the EU. So they're almost, it's like they're preemptively
Yeah.
regulating
They
things
start
that
with
the
regulation.
countries aren't even producing. Yeah.
They start with regulation, and then they're like, what can we innovate? But we have to follow all these regulations. And people are just like, forget it, right? Like, to go somewhere else where we can actually innovate. And
Yeah. And this meme, if you want to understand, if there's anybody out there that still cares about Brexit or is interested in Brexit, that's one of the reasons, one of many, but that's one of the reasons that the British voted to leave the European Union, because they there were so many stories coming out of the European Union where, like, the way that they would regulate like bananas and things like that. I think that was apocryphal in the end, but it was like they would regulate fruit and just like the weirdest things that they would get in there and regulate, and it was kind of like it's very frustrating, I think, to the English mind, the Anglo mind, to be regulated to that extent. But I mean, I say that, and then the British government, which is no longer a part of the European Union, they also choose to regulate things like pretty extensively. So I don't know if it's just something on that continent that
well,
makes them want to regulate things.
if you keep bloating government, obviously they all need something to do. So they make up regulations, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
think
right.
that's our show for today. We ask you to subscribe and to our YouTube, our X, our where are we? We're everywhere except for Meta, except for Facebook and Instagram. Well, we're there, but you just like if you're in the United States, you can still look at it. But if in Canada, we don't allow that for some strange reason. And then we also do a newsletter. If you could sign up for that, it goes out 365 days a year, before 7 a.m. And we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now.